Okay, well, I suggest we start. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone. It's a great pleasure to see you all to this webinar. We have the pleasure to welcome Helen Shepherd, the Global Sustainability Director of RX, to explain us about the development of their net zero roadmap. Helen, it's such a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for your time. I will give you the word in a second, just maybe to inform everyone that this webinar is being recorded, and we will put the recordings online after this webinar. So probably even tonight you will find it on the YouTube channel of Net Zero Carbon Events. As you know, we have started the phase of implementation now, which means that we are using all the theory which was developed in the last years and put it all into practice. So just a couple of weeks ago, we have circulated an email to everyone and asked you to join any of the projects. This is still valid. So if you would like to become a part of these projects, part of the team who develops all the methodologies, please come forward at any time. Just drop us a line and then we will get in touch. On the other side, of course, we will do a number of webinars of this kind because we've been approached by quite a few stakeholders who are still struggling to design their own roadmap, which is, of course, part of the pledge. We hope that with this webinar series, we will be able to help all of us a little bit more in order to understand how to move forward on the design of the roadmap towards net zero. Of course, there is no benchmark as such since we're all quite new to this topic, and that's why we will have quite a few webinars. So starting today with RX. The next one will be together with Elizabeth from Freeman, and it's going to be on the 22nd of May. So you can write it down already in your calendar. We will send the invitation and information about that webinar after we finish this one. We will have some time for a Q&A after the presentation of Helen, but you can already use the chat button here in order to place your questions so that all these questions will be then answered by Helen. And on the other side, we wanted to make a little poll. So if you could already indicate in the chat whether your company, your organization has started working on your roadmap, and possibly whether you are already finished with this. So that will be quite an interesting exercise to see and to understand. And then we can indeed discuss all this after Helen's presentation. So without any further ado, Helen, I give the word to you. Thank you so much again for your time and for making this happen, and looking forward to the presentation.
Thanks so much, Alex. It's a real pleasure to be here and to talk about our process, the process that we went through in developing and publishing our own roadmap. So, you know, Alex, you invited me to come and talk about this process, and I did have to think long and hard about it because there was a small part of me that was like, oh no, I want to try and forget that whole process of writing a roadmap. But hopefully I will convey today that it wasn't that painful. So I'm going to share some slides. Now, I did this before and it did work. So I think you're able to see my screen.
It works, Helen, it works.
How to advance it. Okay, so when I was thinking about you know, the process that we went through, this quote came to mind, and I think it's perfect really in encapsulating what we went through in developing our net zero roadmap. Because when it comes to sustainability, we can be so focused on getting it absolutely right that it can sometimes be a barrier to moving forward. We can get quite overwhelmed by the huge obstacles that we face when it comes to sustainability. And I think in the Net Zero Carbon Events Initiative, the commitment around publishing a roadmap was really to kind of give credibility to the initiative, to create transparency, but also to make sure that we all have our own set of goals that we're working towards. And this can be daunting, especially when those goals are as big as achieving net zero. And yet, our approach at RX, and again, it might not be an approach that works for everyone, was to just try and come up with a pathway and a set of goals, which on the one hand felt stretching and that would really challenge our event teams, but also on the other hand that were plausible and achievable, and something that we can build on. So, you know, we didn't want to kind of, we're not saying that what we've done so far is exactly perfect, but it's a starting point for us and we can build on it. And I think that's kind of the key message today, is that actually we've got to start somewhere, and putting together a roadmap does really kind of focus the mind a little bit. And so yeah, try not to let kind of perfection get in the way of that progress. As an organizer, we talk predominantly about scope 3 emissions, and we have only just in the last few years started to measure those scope 3 event related emissions. We've covered those categories in the roadmap, but it was a real challenge to think about how to set goals for those areas when we didn't really know what the impact was. We didn't have the data. And so, you know, we were really trying to come up with goals that we could work towards. And part of our goal is trying to get better data to try and understand what the impact is for those different categories. And that's why the Net Zero Carbon Events initiative and the roadmap that was published back in 2022 was such a useful tool and framework. And I think for anyone who isn't familiar with the industry roadmap for our industry, I would encourage you to really familiarize yourself with it. And especially if you haven't started writing your roadmap, the industry roadmap is hugely helpful in terms of providing that framework. They set they've kind of set the categories out. There's 5 categories of emissions, and in each category there are given milestones that when we were looking at starting our own roadmap, we drew on those milestones. We used them as a basis for like consultation and discussion. So I would encourage everyone to who is struggling to kind of really familiarize themselves with this roadmap, and it's a very, very helpful tool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, I guess, the process and the stages that we went through in developing our roadmap. And believe it or not, it was a year in the making. I can't quite believe that it took us that long, but we started back in February 2023, and our first kind of focus on our own roadmap was using the industry roadmap to think about what the goals would be that we would be setting for each of those 5 action areas to get to net zero. And we looked at it in terms of the short term, medium term, and longer term goals. And it's much harder when you're thinking about those longer term goals, but at least you've got an aspiration of where you need to get to. And so back in February 2023, we had a meeting in person of our Global Sustainability Council. We came together and we looked at the goals in the roadmap, in the industry roadmap, in the Net Zero Carbon Events roadmap. And we looked at the goals that we thought we could set for ourselves. And I had already put forward some suggestions. We had a lot of discussion on the goals around venue and production, venue energy and production. And we started to run out of time for some of the other categories because we realized that actually it's hard when you're thinking about different geographies and how some geographies will move quicker than other geographies. So that was the initial consultation. And we, as a Sustainability Council, as I said, went back and forth on that quite a few times. At the same time, we did some scoping research. So around like probably March, April, May time, I did a bit of research to try and understand, well, what do other roadmaps look like? What does a net zero roadmap look like? We've got the industry roadmap, but what have companies done in this space? And RX is part of a listed company. So we have our parent company, RELX. RELX have a very, very, very small roadmap that they include in their annual report. So that wasn't necessarily the most helpful guidance. But there's also an expectation among FTSE companies that they write carbon transition plans. Again, this time last year, very few companies in the FTSE had done that. So, and those that had done them were pretty comprehensive, actually, documents around how they were reducing scope 1 and 2 emissions, less information on those scope 3 emissions, because those are the categories that everyone's struggling with. So we took that mapping to help us think about the structure of what we would like to include in our roadmap, and what we thought we should cover in addition to those milestones. And then I went away and had to sit down and actually write the roadmap. Writing's not my strong point, but I was very fortunate that I had I had not only the people in the Global Sustainability Council, very helpful input, but really great colleagues in our global corporate communications team as well to help with the writing. And basically from June, when we had our first draft, it went through loads and loads of kind of consultation, feedback, input through different stakeholders within the business. So starting with the Sustainability Council and the corporate communications team, it went beyond that, eventually to kind of our CFO and COO, who are our executive sponsors for sustainability, to our own CEO. It went up to our parent company at RELX, to their CFO, and to other leaders in that business. So we had feedback and input from lots and lots of different stakeholders and very senior stakeholders. And although we were targeting trying to publish by the end of last year, it actually didn't align with when our parent company publishes their data. So we decided to postpone until February this year because we wanted to include the latest data. So by the time it kind of got to December, we were like, oh, it's already going to be out of date, because the latest data it would have had in it was going to be 2022. And we saw an opportunity to then include the 2023 data, which was our scope 1 and 2 data. So we kind of postponed just for the first 2 months of this year to be able to include that. All through this period, we have kind of continued with our own internal strategy, which is focusing on measurement and also starting to kind of pivot to like reduction as well. And our measurement focus is on scope 3, so energy and waste data collection. And throughout most of last year, we were broadening that to look at the production input. So we were measuring, doing carbon footprints of events, as well as trying to get a better understanding of the production footprint at our events. But although we were reviewing the data with our leaders every 2 months, we realized quite quickly that we were not going to have scope 3 data ready in time to include in the roadmap. And that's why it's quite helpful to know that we will be reporting every 2 years. We've got that commitment as part of Net Zero Carbon events. And so we'll be publishing an update actually next year where we aim to include our scope 3 event data. So that's a little bit on the timeline and the process. And for me, I think I really underestimated the length of time that it would take to get from it being drafted and from getting a draft that we were like happy with to getting it signed off by the CEO and the CFO. That actually took months and much longer than I anticipated. But at the same time, I was really happy that, you know, the CFO and the CEO had input into this document because it shows that they are engaged in sustainability, that it's important to them. So I kind of welcomed that input, even though it meant that it kind of delayed us a little bit longer. So I mentioned that I did this mapping to kind of just understand what we should include and what others had included in roadmaps. I came up with this list. So this was what I proposed. This was like way back in April last year when I was starting to draft the roadmap. These were the sections that I said I would cover. A CEO statement, which again is really important to set the tone, to demonstrate leadership and commitment for sustainability and for our net zero goals. That's really foundational for us. The introduction and show how we align with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and the Science Based Targets initiative, the scope of the roadmap, so basically what the roadmap is going to cover, and alignment with our industry net zero carbon initiative, the key milestones, our current data, some key projects and case studies to show how we are actioning and what we're currently doing on sustainability, and then offsetting strategy. So our roadmap does include most of this, but it doesn't include scope 3 data, as I've mentioned. We just didn't have enough to be able to share in the roadmap. And it doesn't include our approach to offsetting either. And this is in part because until we know what our scope 3 data is, it's a bit difficult for us to commit to an offsetting strategy. But that's something that's still in the pipeline, and we're developing in line with the work that we're doing to understand what that scope 3 data is. And then we have added in some sections. So we've got a section on our sustainability structure, and also we've included our sustainability strategy and how we're progressing that. And then I think that what it's important to say is that the net zero carbon events, the key commitments that we have, one of them is around like reporting on progress at least every 2 years. So we know that the roadmap that we've written, we will be updating, we will be able to kind of build on that. So by next year, when we come to publish our data, we can kind of update on the progress of those goals. We can revise or amend those goals if we need to. and it's kind of a marker in the sand for how we can report on progress. I think that's probably everything that I want to cover in terms of the process that we went through to develop our roadmap. We are a large company, for those that don't know RX, running over 300 events globally, and it is a balancing act to find goals that will work everywhere, because we know that some markets are more advanced than other markets. But as I mentioned at the beginning, I think sometimes you just have to push yourself and put a marker in the sand, really, so that we can start and make progress. I think I'm happy to kind of answer any questions if there are questions. I will stop sharing, I think, if I can. Is that right?
Thanks a lot, Helen. Indeed, well, I mean, you've mentioned indeed that the roadmap is kind of the first version, and you will be constantly updating it, which is of course great to hear. And I think it's also pretty normal to understand that indeed we all should inspire to this, because this is some sort of a living document, right? So maybe before we open the Q&A, first question from my side, if you don't mind. Of course, RX is a big company, stock listed company, and you are dedicated to run the sustainability. On the other side, quite a lot of stakeholders of the Net Zero Carbon Events Initiative are rather small. So my question, really quite easy, what would you suggest to all these small and medium-sized companies when they start designing the roadmap? Is there anything you can say as a tip, suggestion, hint? I think anything will be quite helpful here.
Yeah, we're a big company. We're a small team. Currently just me, but hoping that will increase. I think that yes, SMEs won't necessarily have a dedicated person in charge, and they may be relying on passionate people in their business to drive forward sustainability. What I would suggest is that the Net Zero Carbon Events Industry Roadmap is a really useful framework. There's so much good content in that industry roadmap, and there's a lot of content. But as an SME, identify what you're already doing on sustainability, because that will be your starting point, and what's most material to your business. So what can you affect and impact most easily, rather than trying to address all of those categories. And then you can start to develop some key goals, potentially around just one category or one aspect of the events kind of ecosystem. So it might be something that's most material to your business. For us, our roadmap, it does include our scope 1 and 2 data, because clearly we've got to be making reductions in our scope 1 and 2 data. But when we come to events, as an organizer, all the emissions pretty much are associated with scope 3, but that's not going to be the same for all stakeholders in the industry. So it really will depend on kind of what's most material, and there may be data that you already have access to. So if you're a venue, your scope 1 and 2 data will be potentially more easily to influence than us as an organizer trying to influence that. But yeah, essentially kind of looking at the Net Zero Carbon Events roadmap, picking where you're already maybe making progress, or a category that you think you can most easily influence and reduce, looking at your scope 1 and 2 emissions, because all companies need to do that. And it's fair to say, I think, when it comes to scope 1 and 2 for us at RX, I mentioned that they're pretty much our office-based emissions. Our parent company has been measuring and tracking scope 1 and 2 for many years. A lot of the reductions that we see in scope 1 and 2 have come from more efficient offices, like efficiencies being made in the offices themselves, moving offices to more efficient locations, and then consolidating office space as well. But for RX, we know that those impacts will be dwarfed by the impacts of our events.
Okay. I will say we can open the Q&A. I've seen that quite a few have already mentioned that, for example, Olympia London have developed their roadmap already, so that's great to hear. Freeman published theirs as well, of course, and Marble is working on that. So, of course, there's quite a few companies still working on this, which is great to hear. Ben, I see your hand, so I will definitely give you a word. Maybe the first question, Nastya Lee. You are very welcome to raise your question just live without writing. So very welcome. You have the word.
Thank you, Alexander. So my first question was about scope 3. Are you reporting on events related emissions as scope 3 separately, or does that include both core operations? Scope 3 emissions such as business travel, commuting, purchased goods and services. So is that all combined together with events, or is that kind of treated separately?
Yeah, so we treat it separately in terms of the way that we're measuring it and reporting it. So when it comes to scope 3, we've already made quite a bit of progress in we've been reporting at the group level, so through our parent company, some scope 3 emissions related to purchased goods and services and business travel and employee commuting. And then we are looking at event emissions separately because we're measuring them in a very different way. And then I think your second question is around like what tools are we using for our greenhouse gas emissions measurement. So we've got a few different tools. For our scope 1 and 2 emissions, we're using a third-party tool called Ecometrica. And we've got some scope 3 that is starting to go into that tool as well. We have an internal dashboard that's created called our CO2 hub. That's pulling in a lot of kind of supplier data based on spend. And our procurement team at the RELX level, so at our parent company level, are doing a lot of work on that. It's also helping us visualize travel data so we can see by business the amount of CO2 generated from employee travel. And then when it comes to event emissions, we are using Excel predominantly to measure and track energy and waste, and then also some of the other production emissions around carpets, signage, exhibition stands, the exhibitor footprint, all of that. And then our carbon footprinting tool that we've used for to footprint the events, that's in a spreadsheet as well. So it's kind of drawing on open or like publicly available emission factors for some categories, so like the ICE database. We're also using DEFRA emission factors. when it comes to energy, we're using emission factors from the third party that we work with for our scope 1 and 2 energy reporting and emissions. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much, Helen.
No problem.
Okay, then there was another question from Clemens, who doesn't have access to the mic. What obstacles did you encounter in obtaining scope 3 data? So it's pretty much maybe in line with what you just explained.
Yeah, well, I think there's many challenges in terms of getting scope 3 data, because scope 3 data is so broad. And so I feel like we're kind of starting to make some headway when it comes to our scope 3 event data. But and when I'm looking at scope 3 event data, we're looking at the 5 categories really that are outlined in the Net Zero Carbon Events initiative, like in the roadmap. So we started with energy and waste because we felt like that was the more easily obtainable data. And I suspect that many other organisers are kind of doing the same. One of the challenges around like energy data is that it's like not necessarily reported consistently. So venues might report for a whole building. They might have different ways that they're estimating it if they're apportioning it to our event. We might not necessarily be the only organizer in the venue. So how do they apportion it? So that for us is a bit of a challenge to try and understand, like, are we comparing apples to apples? Like, is it being reported in a consistent framework? And then other challenges around, like, do we have enough data to be able to then make estimates for venues or events that haven't reported any data? And we're doing that for waste as well. And then when it comes to waste, like understanding the different waste streams. Just recently, we've had a number of venues that report waste to us, but they've reported, because we want the waste reported in weight so that we can then convert that into carbon emissions. But you know, one of the reports that I saw recently, they reported it in the number of bags of waste, and I was like, okay, fine, we've got, I don't know, 200 bags of waste. It's like, that doesn't mean anything to me. So some of the data that comes through is not necessarily very helpful. There's many, I could talk probably for another hour about the challenges in scope 3 data or more, because there are many. I haven't even kind of mentioned like production, the elements around production, but yeah, there are lots of challenges that I think we will all recognize in terms of getting that data. But I don't think we should let the challenges of getting the data be a barrier to kind of progress. We know that the data isn't going to be absolutely perfect, but we can make assumptions about that data. We can start to use it to inform decisions that we're going to make in terms of like carbon reduction goals that we want to roll out. So, and then, you know, just by understanding what the data is and how it's being reported, we can then, you know, work with those venues, work with those other stakeholders on how we might be able to improve that data. So, you know, there's good things that can come out of the challenges as well.
Yeah, data, I think, is always the biggest problem we have, and most probably we all experience it. But thanks for this, Helen. Ben, you have a question? You're next, so welcome.
Hello.
Hi there.
Helen, it's good to see you. We saw the net zero plan from RX come out, and it is brilliant. We were very jealous actually when we saw it. So well done, because I know they are monsters to create. So it's great that you sort of put it out there first, and it gives all of us a chance to copy with pride. So thank you for that. I've got two questions for you, if I may. The first one is, I'm curious if there's anything that you really wanted in that the business wasn't going to put in because it wasn't ready for it. I know you said scope 3 data, but I'm just wondering if there were things you wanted that you couldn't, and why was the business nervous about it? And the second question was very specific. It's I noticed that you're talking about, you're starting to think about attendee flights, but that's I think out of scope. But you also put in the stand builds, and you were looking to make things reusable, but I couldn't quite tell if it was going to be your own feature areas that are going to be reusable by 2030, or if you hope that all of the exhibitor stands will be reusable by 2030. As you know, that's a bit of a passion of mine, so I was curious what the plans were.
Yeah, great question. So the first one, I'm trying to recall now, because I'm sure there were changes that were made. So I think I had like the framework of things that I thought I would include when we started to write it. The scope 3 data was one of those elements that I thought we would include at this time last year when we were writing it, but it quite quickly became apparent that the data that we had then was just not, it was changing, it was just changing so quickly from one month to the next that we didn't feel like it was stable enough for us to be able to say this is kind of scope 3 energy footprint, for example, event energy footprint. So the decision to kind of not include that, I was quite happy about. There was some, I think there was some changes to how we describe that measurement process that, you know, I would have been very happy to have been a bit more transparent about, you know, how we were measuring and what we were measuring and what data we had. So I think there was some changes to that were made. But overall, I think, you know, for example, the decision to include 2023 data, it hadn't actually occurred to me to include it. I was like at the point where I was like, I just want to get this document out. And it was our CFO who was like, well, why don't you hold off another month or so and then add in the 2023 data? So for scope 1 and 2. So that was like really helpful for them to suggest that, because it kind of wasn't on my radar at that point, even though we were working on that side of things separately. And then your comment around reusable stands, I can't remember how it's worded in the roadmap now, but essentially we start off with everything that we're purchasing ourselves to make sure that it's reusable and recyclable. So for things that we're purchasing ourselves, but then in the medium to longer term, it would extend to like our exhibitors as well. So I think I wanted to make that distinction because yes, we're committed to like educate our exhibitors and to influence the behavior of our exhibitors, but we probably want to get our own house in order first to be able to do that. So yeah, absolutely, like ultimately the longer term plan will be that we've influenced exhibitors to be able to have fully reusable stands at our events.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, no, it's just really good to see it. So thank you for leading the way on that. It's very good.
Thanks, Helen and Ben, of course, for the excellent question. Adeline, I have you with a raised hand, so please.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Hi, Alex. And thank you, Helen, for sharing your experience. My question is about the offsetting strategy. Just first to understand, why wasn't it included into the roadmap this year? And what would be your plan in the coming 2 years before the next version is available in 2025 or 2026?
Yes, we've got a little bit of work to do on the offsetting strategy piece. So currently our parent company, RELX, they don't really talk about this. They don't reflect this in their reporting, but they purchase offsets for scope 1 and 2 and scope 3 emissions. So and those scope 3 emissions cover business travel, employee commuting, home working, that type of thing. And some, I think, purchase goods and services. So they have a strategy in place and they have a really strict criteria when it comes to offsets that they purchase. With our own setting strategy would align with our parent company. But I think for us, we wanted to understand a little bit more about actually what is the total footprint of an event, and how would we start to introduce offsets for those Scope 3 emissions. And I think it was difficult for us to commit to what that would look like until, without really knowing what those impacts are. So the offsetting strategy will align with the parent company in terms of the types of offsets that we're purchasing. So nature-based, REDD+, verified, certified offsets. All of that will align, and we have at the group level a carbon governance group. So I think any offsetting strategy that we're developing will ultimately need to go through that sign off with the carbon governance group, and so it was becoming quite clear that we weren't going to have it ready in time for the roadmap.
Does it
Thank
answer
you
the
very
question?
much.
Okay, very well. Are there any more questions before we say goodbye to Helen? I don't see any raised hands or anything, so then I suggest that we all thank Helen for the contribution today. Helen, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure to have you on this first webinar. Really, really great. And as I've mentioned, next time we will have the pleasure of Elizabeth presenting their roadmap of 3 men. Very much looking forward to that as well. Don't forget, on the 22nd of May, we will send the invitation pretty soon. So you're very welcome to register for this webinar as well. And thank you all for attending. It's great to have seen you here. I hope it was useful. And if you have any questions, you can always approach us. And also, of course, if you would like to participate more actively in the initiative, as I've mentioned, just write us an email as well, so that we can initiate the contact there. So thank you very much one more time to Helen, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye.